What is up, YouTube family? You are back on the other side with yours truly, Mike G. And tonight I'm bringing you the story of one of MMA's most traveled and successful commentators. He has covered fights for Affliction, M1, Bellator, and Pride Fighting, and currently rocks the headset for the Bare Knuckle Fighting Championships. Ladies and gentlemen, the big wheel himself, Sean Wheelock. How are you doing, Sean?
Mike, how are you, brother? Thank you. That's an outstanding introduction, my friend. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm doing well. Very excited to have you on. Very appreciative. My first question, you were born in Kansas. Tell me about life and family growing up in the cultural mecca of Shawnee.
Yeah, you're from Arkansas, right? So I'm just one state to the north of you. So Shawnee is a little suburb. It's not so little anymore. It's a little suburb when I was a kid. I still live in Shawnee. It's a suburb of Kansas City. It's part of the greater Kansas City metro area. Okay. It's in Johnson County, Kansas. So if people know Kansas City, I'm probably about a 35-minute drive if the traffic cooperates west of Arrowhead Stadium, and I'm probably about a 35-minute drive if traffic cooperates east of Lawrence, Kansas, and the University of Kansas. But I'm the only child of a single mom. I'm a kid who always wanted to be in sports broadcasting. I didn't know anybody who knew anybody who knew anybody who knew anybody. And I have the most supportive mom in the world. I was actually over spending time with her today. She lives in the house where I grew up, about 12 minutes from where I live with my wife and my two daughters. And my mom always encouraged me that I could do this. I always had the attitude, someone's got to be doing this. It might as well be me. I just didn't have the first clue how I was going to go about it or how I was going to get into this business because we were not connected in any way.
Gotcha. Now, as a father of two daughters, I have to ask, how old are your girls?
My girls are 13 and 19. It's funny, everybody has a different experience, Mike. We're a really, really close family. I'm super close to my mom and my wife, who I've been with over 25 years. She's from England. She's an American citizen now. She's more Americanized, I think, than I am at this point. But I'm in England more than she is. But we're a super close family. And so many people say to me, oh, wait till your girls get older. And they're 13 and 19, and it's just spectacular. I'm very, very fortunate on that. Probably a lot of it is that I'm gone a third of the year, so they probably don't get sick of me, and I think it keeps things fresh.
They have time to miss you. That's nice.
That's right.
Okay. Do you have you said you knew you wanted to be a commentator young. Do you have a first memory? Someone who wants to sing and becomes a professional singer has that first memory of singing in church or singing in family. Do you have that moment, maybe around the dinner table or something where you made your first play-by-play announcement?
Yeah, it's funny. I don't remember one specifically, but I don't remember a time when I didn't want to do it. And a few years ago, I was looking through some boxes at my mom's house, and I found these cassette recorders or audio cassette tapes in my old audio cassette recorder, and it was like 7, 8, 9-year-old me trying to do play-by-play, trying to do a sports talk show, trying to host the local news. And I don't think that's dissimilar from other people who become play-by-play. It's just something you always want to do. It was never a time where I thought, okay, now I'm going to sit down in front of a tape recorder. I just don't remember a time when I didn't want to do this. I think a lot of people who do what I do for a living are those who love sports, who just aren't particularly very good at them. And if we were, we would try to be professional athletes, and we're not. So the kids who are always playing sports, we're athletic, or we're not athletic. We want to be in athletics. We're just not very athletic. So you feel like, all right, I can only go so far as an athlete, which is probably not even high school. And then you try to channel it in other ways. A lot of play-by-plays, I think, have that experience. The kid who loves sports, watches every sport, memorizes stats. It's funny, as a kid, I remember when I was really young, I was determined to learn the nickname of every Division I school. Now, there were a lot more then. There were probably 300. Now there are probably 360. 380, but just colossal nerd things like that. Like, as a little kid, wanting to know the nickname of every Division I university, loving stats, loving Stratomatic baseball, just loving things like that. I found an old pro wrestling program where I was probably 6 or 7 at Central States Memorial Hall, and I'd meticulously written down all of the outcomes of the matches. It's that
Sure.
colossal nerd stuff, Mike, that gets people into my job later in life.
All right. How did you get your first real commentating gig? What was it?
Yeah, so I started when I was in college. I went to Arizona State University for 2.5 years. Literally, the first day I got there, I went to the student radio station, which was about 3 days before I think school started, and got on with student radio. I thought I had accomplished something, and then I realized that everybody who went there, they put in student radio, KASR at Arizona State. I think it's still there, but it's an online station now. And then I just pestered anybody and everybody. I don't know what they're called now. They were called runners when I was that age, which was if it's the NFL on CBS or college football on ABC or ESPN. It was $50 a day when I was a kid. I hope they've raised that, but probably not, knowing the network. But it's pick someone up at the airport, go get the dry cleaning, run to the supermarket for us. Back then, go make copies. Now it would be, I'm sure, send emails or print this off. Just anything and everything to keep my mouth shut and my eyes open and my head down and try to learn the business. I got hired, and was why I quit college, International Hockey League. There was a minor league hockey team called the Kansas City Blades. And my sophomore year in college, I was the public relations intern for the team in the same league, the old International Hockey League. It was the equivalent of like AAA hockey. The league is gone now. They absorbed it in the American Hockey League, but one tick below the National Hockey League. And there were the Phoenix Roadrunners. I got on my sophomore year as their PR intern. I got to meet people in the league. I knew that Kansas City was going to get an expansion team. I got to meet those people. I bugged them mercilessly until they finally said yes. And they offered me that job when I quit college, and I drove back home to Kansas City and moved back in with my mom in the room I'd had since I was a little kid. And away we went.
How did mom feel about that?
Oh, great. My mom would support me no matter what I did. There's a different dynamic too. When you're the only child, male or female, the only child of a single parent, I think there's always a different dynamic. I think my mom was thrilled that I was back. And I had gone to college with the intention of being a professional commentator. And I thought, all right, I'm now a professional commentator. So the irony is my late father was a college professor. My mom's a retired art teacher. I have educated people and educators on both sides of my family tree. But I was done with Arizona State University after 2.5 years doing International Hockey League. And then from there, I got a lot of lucrative jobs. I got the job doing morning sports for KY 102, which was the big FM station in Kansas City. I would cover the Royals. They paid me $10 a game to cover the Royals. I wasn't really a hockey guy. I watched it, but I wasn't really a hockey guy. So when I saw that Major League Soccer was coming, I tried to get that. I got on the year before Major League Soccer with the indoor team, and they paid me $50 a game. So some very, very lucrative gigs like that. I think on Major League Soccer, I think the first game was $500, which felt like about $5 million to me. Up from $10 a game as a radio reporter for KY 102 covering the Royals, but very lucrative. So I would have paid them $100 a game to get that press pass and to go out, and it's 19, 20 years old, sitting in a box and really learning on the job. It was invaluable experience. The fact that I got $10 a game was like, wow, that's bonus money. I can go drink afterwards. Well, wink, wink. I wasn't 21 yet, but Gatorade. Yeah, that's right.
How does that turn into combat sports?
So I always loved combat sports. I wanted to be a fight commentator, but pre-1993, you have to think about what being a fight commentator meant. Every once in a while, you see that PKA karate on ESPN. There was boxing on ESPN. There was boxing on the three big networks, ABC, NBC, CBS. There was boxing on HBO and boxing on Showtime, and these are all very established people: Barry Tompkins, Jim Lampley, Tim Ryan, right? Marv Albert, Al Bernstein, Al Michaels. Phenomenal A-list commentators. And pro wrestling. I loved pro wrestling as a kid, but I don't know why. And I thought about this. I never wanted to be a pro wrestling commentator, which is weird. I don't know why I didn't, considering how much I loved pro wrestling. But as I got into my later teens, I stopped loving pro wrestling. I would watch it occasionally, but it wasn't the insanity of pro wrestling being a total mark like I was when I was 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, that type of age. Right. Still would watch it occasionally. November 12th, 1993, the poster right behind me, UFC 1. My mom bought me the pay-per-view, $14.95, and it wasn't common. We didn't have a lot of money. Again, my mom's a retired public school art teacher. But if it was a Mike Tyson fight, or if it was some crazy pay-per-view I wanted to watch, like UFC 1, my mom would do it for me. And that changed my life. And I thought, how do I become a fight commentator? Weirdly, Mike, so Art Davie, the creator of UFC, I call him my later in life father. He's listed as dad in my phone. My girls, Ellie and Hadley, call him Grandpa Art. We've known each other since 2011, and he really is my later in life father. And I always say to him, Art, if I would have called you and tracked you down, I'll bet you would have hired me. And maybe not to commentate, you would have done something. He's like, yeah, you're right. He likes the ambition, and he likes that type of drive. And that's how people like John McCarthy and Joe Silva got in with Art Davie. But I knew I wanted to be a combat sports commentator. You just have to think, they're just outside of boxing. There weren't that many jobs. And then there was the UFC, and I was in, and I didn't know how to go about that. So I was doing local radio. I was doing soccer. I started to get some decent soccer work. And then my friend Joe Kelly was a boxing promoter in Kansas City, started promoting MMA. And I was commentating soccer at the time, and we were on Metro Sports Television, which is no longer there. It was like a local cable channel that would show high school game of the week and various random things. And they had the contract to show Major League Soccer. So I didn't work for them. I worked for the club. They're sporting Kansas City now. They were called the Kansas City Wizards. But we were on. So I knew enough people there. So said to my friend Joe Kelly, hey man, because he had never televised his boxing or anything. I said, hey man, if you will let me commentate, I think I can get you on Metro Sports. And he said, deal. And that was my first fight commentary. And that was how I got in. And then there was a period of about 4 years when I had to phase out of soccer, because that's how I was basically making my living, although my wife was really supporting us, and living in quotes, by the way, Mike. And then phasing out and getting into fighting full time. I'm a massive soccer fan, and no disrespect, I wouldn't want to be a full-time soccer commentator. I don't think I'd be sitting in the house that I'm sitting in now, quite frankly. If I stayed in soccer, might be living in a van by the river. I don't think pay has gone up that much from when they were paying me $500 a game when I was like 2 years old, or don't know. But I didn't certainly pursue fighting for the money. I pursued it because that was my real passion. And I got Pride eventually, and Pride turned into M1, and M1 turned into Bellator. And that was the end of my soccer, and that was my full immersion in the fighting, and have never had any desire to do anything but fighting play-by-play on television ever since.
Awesome. Tell me about being in Pride. For a lot of hardcore fans, Pride never die. You know, we will always love Pride. What is different about commentating in Japan? And maybe what's the most memorable fight you remember calling while you were in Pride?
Yeah, no, that's great. And you know, I was at Pride at the very, very end. I was so fortunate to be there, but it was the end. They hired me in 2006, and I recognized it was the end. Their last show was April of 2007. It was originally Stephen Quadros and Boss Rutan, and then Quadros was out. Mauro Ranallo came in, and that's really how Mauro got to be extremely well known. And then Mauro left, and I knew that Pride, looking at the internet, I knew Pride was looking at other people. They tried Damon Perry, they tried Lon McCarran, they tried a couple of other people, and I saw that there was potentially an opening. And getting there was like surreal to me. It was maybe the only time I've ever had a surreal experience in my career. I started as a UFC fan, obviously, because the UFC began in 93, Pride began in 97. But by the time we got to about 2002, 2003, I was a bigger Pride fan than I was a UFC fan. And I would, originally at Blockbuster Video, and then early on, we got Netflix, but it was DVDs in the mail Netflix. And that's where I really got Pride. And then I would get the back catalog and go back and watch all the shows. So getting that opportunity to do Pride, the fight that I did, it's not that well known. People always think about like Don Fry versus Takayama, where they're grabbing in, like the hockey fight. But Don Fry versus James Thompson, that was a fight I did in Pride, and that was a really fun fight. And I was almost like boyishly giddy around Don Fry. Because here's I'd watched in UFC, watched in Pride, and it was at the end of his career. That might have been actually his very last match. James Thompson went on the Bellator, and I got to know him even better and commentated him in Bellator. But it was a good fight. It wasn't a great fight, but the fact that it was Don Fry and it was in Pride and it was Saitama Super in Japan, that was a phenomenal experience. It's weird because the guy who hired me at Pride was not Nobuyuki Sakikibara, who was the head of Pride, but a man named Millen, who was their executive producer for the American TV and worked out of their LA office, eventually ran their LA office. And Jerry's one of my best friends still. I speak to him quite a few times a month. I spoke to him about 5 days ago, actually. And Jerry and I laugh. There's still this alternative universe out there where Pride is still going, and we're getting on a plane about every 3 weeks going to Japan. It's weird how the world works, Vince McMahon, or maybe you don't know. I don't know how well known that is. In the Netflix documentary, Vince and his son Shane McMahon talked about when Shane was interested in buying the UFC from the Fertittas. But I can tell you, and some people know this, I'm not breaking any news, but it's just not that well known, that there were discussions between Nobuyuki Sakikibara and Vince McMahon about possibly WWE. They were WWF, I believe, still at the time, buying Pride. There were a lot of people who looked at Pride. It wound up being the UFC with the Fertittas, and then they put it out of business. But there were some weird twists and turns there. But had it turned another way, there's still probably a thing called Pride. It would be interesting to see what impact they would have and if they would look different, if the UFC would look different, the MMA industry would look different. But yeah, there is that weird alternative universe out there where Jerry Millen and I are still going to Japan every 3 weeks to commentate.
I believe it's UFC 310. Nick Diaz will be fighting, so Pride never die.
No, that's right. I've somewhere. I'm not a hat wearer because dopey in hats, as my kids will remind me, but I do have a Pride baseball cap somewhere.
Awesome.
And not long ago, actually, I found the program. I'm not someone who really saves things from shows, but I at Pride 34, I didn't know that was going to be the last Pride. I knew that was the last Pride under the ownership group led by Nobuyuki Sakikibara. And so there was a program, and I grabbed the program, and I still have that program, which turned out to be the final Pride ever. Pretty cool.
Do you have any behind-the-scenes Yakuza stories you can share?
No, it's funny because now I've been dealing with Nobuyuki Sakikibara. As you saw that at BKFC, we have a promotional agreement, and that's really Jerry Millen who was able to get that going. And Sakikibara, I worked for him, but as the American commentator, you weren't really interacting. He was extremely nice and polite and respectful to me, but he had way bigger things to think about. That's why he had a guy like Jerry Millen. So I've actually been dealing with Saki Kibara more in the last 6 months than I have in the last 15
Oh,
years.
wow.
And I've seen him a couple of times. I was part of a dinner group in New York maybe 3 or 4 years ago that he was there. And they had talked to me about commentating the early Risings, but I was doing M1 at the time. It was post Bellator, pre BKFC, and just the timings didn't work out because of my contract with M1. But I've stayed in touch. But the only thing is that, and I never saw the Yakuza, and from what I've heard, by the time I got there, a lot of that was completely gone. From that, Mr. Sakibara is a gentleman, is a businessman. If there's anything untoward with him, I've certainly never seen that. And a lot of the stories you hear, I think more like late 1990s Pride, as opposed to when I got there, 2006 and 2007. But the funny thing with Pride, though, is that after a show, and all fighters had the same experience, you wait around, you go get a drink. And it would be, I commentated there with Frank Trigg. So Frank Trigg, Jerry Millen, our producer, a couple of the other Americans on the crew. You hang out. Jerry would get a phone call. Okay, you have to go see Mr. Saki Kibara. Go up into a hotel room. You wait in the lounge. You go to the back bedroom. There's all the money. There's your name. They count out the money. You, of course, never, ever count the money back. They count out the money. Here's your money. You signed it. There you go. And you shake hands and thank you very much. So that's just the way they do business. It from the outside, it sounds kind of sketch, but it wasn't. I mean, a World Lightweight Championship paid me cash. M1 paid me cash. Most foreign promotions, when you're a fighter or a commentator, they're paying you in US dollars in large bills.
Right. You mentioned M1 a couple of times. I'm familiar with M1, but for people who are watching who aren't, give us the rundown on M1.
Yeah, unfortunately, it is gone, and I don't know what happened. I did M1 in 2 different stints, but there was a time when M1 was the dominant European promotion. They started in 1997, the same year as Pride. Virtually every Russian that you've seen in the history of the UFC, even now, has fought at least once in M1. From Valentina Shevchenko through Andrei Orlovsky, Alexander Volkov, Habib Nurmagomedov, they go through. It was a phenomenal promotion. So M1 started as a Russian promotion. After Pride went away, my buddy Jerry Millen said, I think I have something for us. And there were some people who were involved kind of on the periphery of Pride. And a lot of it was the management team of Fedor Emelianenko, Gegard Mousasi, Gilbert Eivel. And there was a Dutch group and a Russian group. And in 2007, they took M1 from being basically a Russian promotion to try to make it a bigger European promotion. And they expanded their American television. They hired me, or Jerry Millen did anyway, is the play-by-play commentator. That's when I first started working with Jimmy Smith. Jerry found Jimmy. He had just done Fight Quest, I think, on Discovery or A&E or Discovery. I think it was on Discovery Networks. And that was when we started commentating together. That was amazing. In the first year of M1, we did shows in Spain, Finland, Bulgaria, Brazil, the United States, multiple fights in Russia. It was amazing. We were doing a show about every 3 weeks and going all over the world. I did that for 2 years. Bjorn Rebney came to both Jimmy Smith and me. And at the end of 2009, I talked to Jerry. Jerry's like, you absolutely have to take this. So went to Bellator. When Bellator decided that they were done with me, the M1 people were so nice, reached back out, and then I did M1 all the way through. The week before Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship launched, our first show was BKFC 1 was June 2nd, 2018 in Cheyenne, Wyoming. The week before, I did my final M1 show, which was in St. Petersburg, Russia. But M1 had a really special place in my heart. I loved it. I fell in love with the country of Russia. I know that's not the trendiest or most popular thing to say now because of all the geopolitical things. So I won't talk about politics or about government. I will tell you the Russian people are spectacular. I've been to Russia about 30 times, working for a Russian company with Russian people. I was treated beautifully. I'm so sorry that promotion went out of business. COVID hit, that was very difficult, and they never came back. I didn't know everything. Some of the people I had worked with had already left by then. So they continued to run shows about 2 years after I was gone, and that was the end of it. And I think it's difficult for people in the US and Canada to understand how big M1 was in the late 90s, early and mid 2000s, because literally they were the pipeline to the UFC for Russian fighters. And so many talented, not just Russians, but Kazakhs, Azerbaijanis, fighters from Turkmenistan, fighters from Uzbekistan, pouring into M1, Ukrainians, Poles, Slovaks, Czechs, French, Germans, English. It was really a spectacular promotion.
BKFC, were you drawn to it right away? Were you nervous about it because it was a new sport? And how exactly, you mentioned your friend, how exactly did you land that role?
Yeah, so no, I wasn't nervous at all. So I was someone who had read a lot, as you've ascertained, I'm a giant fight nerd, and like I had read a lot on bare knuckle fighting. I have a book just on my bookshelf, just off camera to my right, over my right shoulder is my big bookshelf, or bookshelves, as the case may be. And with my English wife, and this is years ago before we had kids, we were in England. We may not have even been married then. And there's a section called Charing Cross, which has a lot of bookstores, or at least it did. I don't know now with ebooks. I haven't been there in years, but it was certainly renowned for having all these cool bookstores. Like if you were in the sci-fi, or if you were in the romance, or if you're in the sports like me, you go in. So I found the sports bookstore, and there's a British published book on the history of bare knuckle fighting from the 17 and the 18, which is called Bare Fist. And I bought that, and this is like in the probably late 90s, early 2000s. And I fell in love with it even more. I knew about it, and I'd already read a book on John L. Sullivan, so I knew a little bit about it, but then I knew a lot more after this book, and that turned me on to other books. So by the time I met David Feldman in 2016, I was kind of waiting for someone to get bare knuckle going without even understanding consciously I was waiting for someone to get it going. But because I love the concept of bare knuckle, I didn't know what it would look like. I just felt like if someone ever tried it, man, it's going to work. So at the time, I was doing a podcast with Big John McCarthy, my great friend. He does his show now, Weighing In with Josh Thompson, but the original one was called Let's Get It On, that John and I did for about 2 or 2.5 years. And we had Bobby Gunn on as a guest. John knew Bobby, and I don't know how, or if I did, I forgot. But we had Bobby on as a guest. And I knew who Bobby Gunn was. And for the viewers who don't know, Bobby Gunn is seen as kind of the modern day John L. Sullivan. In that gap before BKFC, although he did fight in BKFC and won, but he was in that gap when bare knuckle fighting was totally underground, totally illegal. He claims a record of 73-0, and I believe he is 73-0. Just a super amazing person, brilliant fighter, an absolute legend. I mean, that underground king of bare knuckle, and really keeping the lineage alive from people like Jem Mace and John Heenan and John L. Sullivan. So we had Bobby on the show. Afterwards, we're off air and we're talking, and we've stopped recording. And Bobby said, "Man, you got to meet my partner, David Feldman. You would be really good as the commentator, because I think we're pretty close to getting it launched." And he gave me his number. I called David Feldman. I think Bobby had said, "Expect my call." David Feldman and I hit it off. David hired me as a consultant in June of 2016, 2 years to the month before we launched. So I've proudly been with BKFC since show one, but I'm even more proud of the fact that I've been with David Feldman 2 years before it launched. And back to your question, was I nervous? Not at all. I knew that if somebody could do this and do it right, within the first 30, probably first 3 seconds of talking to David Feldman and that original call set up by Bobby Gunn, I knew that David Feldman was the guy to do that. Remember too that again, Art Davie, the creator of the UFC, is like my father. So I recognize these types of entrepreneurial geniuses. And Art Davie loves David Feldman, loves BKFC. To him, that's the next generation of what he did 31 years ago now. And it's a cool way to carry on. I'll tell you too, and it's tough for me to say this publicly because I love Bjorn Rebney so much, my boss at Bellator, and I wouldn't want this to be hurtful to Bjorn. But truthfully, this is the only time in my entire career that I would not leave for the UFC. Now, keep in mind, the UFC is not offering me any gigs, and they've never once reached out to me. I've done a million shows on Fight Pass, but that's different. I've never been approached by the UFC. But as much as I loved working for Bjorn, as happy as I was at Bellator when Bjorn was there, not so much when he wasn't there, but when he was there, I still would have left for the UFC, like my partner Jimmy Smith ultimately did. Now is the first time with BKFC. I don't think the UFC is calling, but if they did, I would politely decline. That's how much I'm in love with working for David Feldman, working with Chris Lytle, Dave Feldman Jr., my producer, Jonathan Evans, working with Cyrus Fees, Jeff Houston, Nate Shook, our matchmaker. It's a phenomenal group. I would not want to be anywhere else.
That's awesome. Now, Sean, about let's say about 5 or 6 events into Bare Knuckles history. How are you feeling about the promotion? Are you excited? Are you nervous at all? Tell me how it's going. Maybe a year in.
Yeah, I think I would only be nervous if they had asked me to fight, which thankfully they didn't. Then I would have felt nervous. It was interesting too, because that first year we did 3 shows. And at the time, I had given up M1 because I knew M1, we were doing a lot of shows in M1. And it wasn't fair to M1 not to be able to fully commit. But I was still doing Victory. I was doing Roy Jones Jr. boxing. I was doing World Lightweight Championship. I was doing Lion Fight Muay Thai. I had 8 or 9 shows at the time. So I kept saying to David Feldman, get bigger and I'm going to let all these other shows go, man. Like I love them all in different ways, but this is what I want to do. He kept saying, brother, it's coming. It's coming, Sean. Don't worry. It's coming. This year, I think we're doing 32 shows. I think we did 27 or 28 last year. So it was a gig amongst a lot of gigs to me. It just quickly became my most important gig, to the point where I'm a big believer. Like, I'm wearing a BKFC shirt right now. Partly because I want to promote BKFC and partly because the temperature has dropped markedly. We went from summer to fall very quickly here in Kansas City. So I think my wife needs to turn on the heat in our house and turn off the air conditioning. I was in Spain doing BKFC, but apparently it was 90 on Saturday when I was in Spain in Kansas City. And then on Sunday night, we had our first frost. So you get it too, right? So I'm wearing my BKFC shirt. The reason I bring this up is I'm a big believer that you should always respect who's paying you, whether you're a fighter, whether you're a commentator, whomever. So I'm not going to wear someone else's gear on another show. And I remember, because that's one of my mantras working in the fight business, it was so hard for me to be on a show like Roy Jones Jr. Boxing or Lion Fight or Victory Fighting Championship and not talk about BKFC, because I was so smitten. I was so in love with it. It's almost to me like, I've been married a long time, so I've probably forgotten this analogy, but it would almost be like you're on a date with one woman talking about another woman you just had a date with. I just think it's bad. But this is like 2018, 2019, 2020, and I'm so in love with BKFC. I'm still doing these other shows because I'm a guy who likes to commentate about 40, 45 weeks a year. But I'm thinking, God, I can't stop thinking about BKFC. I love these other shows, and I'm here and I'm fully committed, but man, my heart's really with BKFC. And every year the shows have added. Every year to date, we've added shows. This year will be the first time that we're over 30 shows, and knock on wood, my friend, I hope we're over 40 or 50 shows next year. I still commentate other shows. I did a World Championship boxing 2 weeks ago. I love to keep active. David Feldman is great with me on that, but I will never miss BKFC for another show. And other clients who call me, other promotions, I say, I'm locked in, but keep in mind if BKFC switches their dates, and that's happened to me a couple of times. It actually happened to me last weekend in Spain. I had to say no to one of my MMA shows. They get it. BKFC is my number one show. And I feel bad when you have to say that to people, but they definitely get it. The cool thing is that helps. All these other promoters are huge BKFC fans, so they absolutely get it.
One of my favorite things about BKFC is how it has created an avenue for guys who are maybe at a crossroads in their careers, maybe aren't getting a new contract offer, has allowed them to rejuvenate their fighting careers and continue. How cool has that been for you to see up close and personal?
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Let's talk about some different extremes on that. Mike Perry was a star. He's a superstar now. And Chris Lytle and I have talked about this, and because I love fight history, I think you have to go back to 2000 to find the last person who left the UFC and became a bigger star, and that'd be Mark Coleman. Mark Coleman was a bigger star in Pride when he won the tournament and beat Igor Vovchanchyn in the final with those great knees on the ground.
Yeah.
When nobody beat Igor Vovchanchyn, he was unbeatable.
I love Igor.
Yeah, but me too. He's kind of a lost to history guy, but for fans watching, go to Tapology or Wikipedia. There's a great Wikipedia page on him. He was unbeatable. He was more dominant than Fedor Emelianenko in his era. Yeah. And when Coleman beat him, he was a bigger star in Pride and in the world of fighting than he had been in the UFC. Right. And I think it's all the way forward with Mike Perry. Mike Perry was a star. Everyone knows that, but not on this level. BKFC has been a superstar. And that's testament to BKFC, and that's certainly testament to Mike Perry, who I love. Mike Perry's not just one of my favorite fighters, one of my favorite people on the planet. I just think Mike's
hilarious.
And to see that Mike has been able to get more fame, to get more money, more commercial endorsements, that's made it possible. Yeah. Look at someone like Chris Lytle, who retired at 38, was done with fighting. I believe he had 3 fights left on the table. His final fight was Dan Hardy, defeated Dan Hardy in the main event, and then tells Dana White, I'm sorry, I need to spend more time with my kids. Chris gets an itch to come back and fight, goes 2-0 in BKFC, and it becomes my greatest broadcast partner of all time. No disrespect to Jimmy Smith. And then you have people who just for whatever reason didn't get to the UFC, or maybe had a couple of fights in the UFC, or were undercard people in Bellator, or got cut from Bellator. All these different paths, and BKFC has opened them up. Lorenzo Hunt, who was undoubtedly one of the greatest fighters of this modern bare knuckle era, was 3-5 in pro MMA. Luis Palomino, who until he lost Austin Proud, I think was the pound for pound number 1 in the sport, still one of the greatest in this modern era. I commentated Luis Palomino in my first Bellator, April of 2010. Palomino was a journeyman. That's a disservice, but he never made the UFC. He was more of a mid-card guy in Bellator. He had beaten Jorge Masvidal, but that was on a regional show in Florida. And he becomes a pound-for-pound king in bare knuckle. It's been great to see these opportunities. Something like Britton Hart, who was a B-side in boxing and becomes a world champion in BKFC. I love that. And personally, too, it has been so much fun for me to reconnect with people, whether that's Eddie Alvarez or Rick Hahn, who were my buddies from Bellator, people I knew from the regionals, from like Victory Fighting Championship. I commentated Taylor Starling on an M1 when her first pro fight in MMA on an M1 USA card. We were in Tennessee. So to see these people who I've had at some point in my career, maybe in Bellator, even in Pride, in M1, maybe on a regional show, maybe on like a Roy Jones Jr. boxing, and to see them come into BKFC, it's been great. From the big picture too, I want to see fighters make money. And the reality is too, and I don't think a lot of people in the industry really look at this or talk about this. I think fans are smarter to this than people in the industry are. Let's say you're a man or a woman in UFC and you're on a 30 and 30 contract, 30,000 to show, 30,000 to win, right? You go 2-4, 2-5 in UFC and they cut you. Now you're 28 years old. Where do you go? Bellator is gone, right? They exist in name only. PFL, just by their structure, has a finite number of slots. ACA is really difficult because of everything geopolitically happening with Russia right now. KSW is a great promotion in Poland. They don't run a ton of shows. One Championship really has not signed that many North Americans since they did the Ben Askren deal and Brandon Vera. They, outside of the grapplers, they were largely signing Asian and Eastern European fighters. There are a few opportunities in Ryzen, but really you're looking at a regional show. And a good regional main event pay is maybe 4,000 and 4,000 and 20 or 30% of ticket sales that you're having to go around. So there just aren't a lot of opportunities. It's almost like being cut from the NFL. You can make $3.5 million and then you get cut the next year. Where are you going to go? Arena football for $500 a game? We'll play in Canada for $80,000 a year. There's a precipitous drop. And that's what we see in MMA for fighters who don't age out of the UFC, but who are young. Many cases like under the age of 32 young. But the UFC is done with them. And it's either go to the regional circuit, try boxing, and good luck with that, the way boxing is structured, or hope to maybe get a couple of foreign fights, or maybe go get a job or open a gym. It's tough. And, and by a job, I mean, like go get a job in the civilian world. And that can be very, very difficult, especially for people who are in their 30s and have never done that. And with BKFC, here's a major promotion. It's going to fill arenas. We're going to be on worldwide TV with a high-level broadcast, I believe. I'm not talking about the commentators. I'm just saying the production and everything. Make your own judgments on the commentators, although Lytle's awesome. We all know that. But that gives you the opportunity to make money. That is what I think is great in BKFC as well. It is another avenue that is desperately needed in the combat sports industry for fighters to be able to make money, especially, again, very young and relevant fighters who've been released from the UFC. And the drop, again, financially is just precipitous, man.
All right. We're all familiar with Fight Week. Fighters show up a few days early. They go through their ritual. They weigh in. They fight. Is there a Fight Week for a commentator? And so, what is the process of preparing for a show?
Yeah, no, that's great. And I'll tell you, so I do this on every show. So whether I'm commentating BKFC or the boxing I did 2 weeks ago, if I do Fighting Alliance Championship, which is the MMA show I commentate in Kansas City, it doesn't matter to me. When I was doing World Lightweight Championship in Myanmar, it was the same process. Doing M1 in Russia, it was the same process. I'll take BKFC, just what we did in Spain. So a BKFC, if we're fighting on a Friday, I'm getting in on a Tuesday night. If we're fighting on a Saturday, I'm getting in on a Wednesday night. The 2 days before a fight, Chris Lytle and I meet with every single fighter on the card. So BKFC, we're typically looking at 11 or 12 fights. So 22, 20 fighter meetings. What I take great pride in is everybody is treated the same by me. So whether you're the main event or whether you're fight one on the prelims, you get the same fighter interview with me. And that's about a 15 to 20 minute sit down, depending on how chatty they are. Some people want to go in a little deeper on answers, but it's a minimum of 15 minutes. And we're sitting and we keep it completely private. We don't record it. It doesn't go on social media. I know there are some commentators, it's more of a boxing thing than an MMA thing, but some commentators will say, "Hey, Mike, your opponent said this. How do you respond?" We don't do anything like that. It's 100% in confidence. It's in a vacuum. So we'll meet with the fighters and we tell them, I call it the disclaimer speech. They all get it once. And I'm like, okay, you remember what I told you last time? They're always cool. I want to see the fight through their eyes. And I'm that way with everybody. It was weird when I was with Bellator after Bjorn Rebney left. And I'm not picking on Scott Coker. It's really the Spike people, and Spike's gone, which is probably a good thing. I was asked by one of the executives from Spike, he goes, why do you bother meeting with the prelim fighters? I said, because they're fighting, man. Like, why wouldn't I? It's like, yeah, but they're just prelims. Yeah, but we're commentating prelims. So it's important to them. So it's important to me. If you want me to commentate, I'm only doing one job, man. I like to think of myself as a light switch, not a dimmer switch, man. There's no shades of on or off for me. I'm either on or I'm off. So it doesn't matter if you're fighting for a world title or if you're fighting in the prelims and this is your first fight and you're 19 years old, you're getting the same fighter interview with me. You're getting the exact same performance from me. There's no shades of this.
Right.
And so 2 days out, Chris and I are at the hotel. There's a dedicated conference room. And we're sitting down 15 to 20 minutes with everybody on the card, times 22 or 24, or maybe 26 if we have 13 fights. Then the next day, I start putting together what I call my spotting board. I'm reading over all of my notes because I don't record it. I feel like it's a better atmosphere if I'm just typing. I don't want anything to be recorded in that. Just kind of, I think about the germane points. What are they talking about? If it's bare knuckle, they're talking about maybe range and distance. If I'm doing this in MMA, they might be talking about certain grappling sequences.
Sure.
Boxing is going to be a similar mindset to how they're fighting bare knuckle. Talking about different punches, ranges, tempos, starts, things like that. And then I'll look at what their opponent says, and I'm building that out. So that's really then my day, the day out, go to weigh-ins night before. Lytle and I have a great dinner. I love drinking alcohol. I never drink on fight week until after the show. It's just something I found worked for me early on. And then I'll drink a drink or two after the show. And then I'm I'm always on the earliest flight I can get out to get back home to my family. But it's funny because sometimes people think like, did you fly in day of? It's like, no, I've actually been here about 3 days. So I don't know what other commentators do. I don't care. I don't feel like what I do is right for everybody. I know that it's right for me. So there's no judgment from me. Some people don't like to talk to fighters. Some people want to go in cold. Some people like to get a research packet. I don't have a research producer, nor do I want one. I want to meet the fighters. I want to know the fighters as human beings. I want to see how they answer certain questions. I want to understand their motivation. I want to sit with them in a room. And that's really where my show gets made. So the equivalent is, as a fighter, that's my training camp. Getting in, talking to the fighters, really understanding their mindset, their mentality, talking about their strategy, how they view their opponent. That's my ritual. And getting a great dinner with Lytle the night before and drinking an unseemly amount of Diet Mountain Dew, which I do anyway in real life, which is the full-on shoot. That's not a work. It's a full shoot.
Okay. Most of us are our own harshest critics. I don't know if that's you or not. Yeah. What would have to happen while you were calling a fight for you to feel like you did not do a good job afterwards?
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I rarely will go back and watch anything because I think it's an exercise in futility unless somebody can invent a time machine where I can go back. I'll get, like I think a lot of people in this industry, I'm definitely a perfectionist, and I'll get obsessed on things that maybe literally nobody noticed. So if I'm going back and I'm watching something, I'm going to watch one little thing to think if I botched it, and if so, how badly I botched it. But when I was a soccer commentator, I had a buddy of mine named Tony Miola. Tony Miola was the goalkeeper for the United States at World Cup 1990 and 94, and then he came back and was goalkeeper again in 2002. And I got to be really good friends with Tony. He's a great soccer broadcaster now. When I'm commentating for the Kansas City MLS club, he was their goalkeeper. We wound up doing a local radio show together, really hit it off. And I remember Tony telling me one time, he's like, in my career, I've had a couple of brilliant matches and a couple of terrible matches. but largely I've been really consistent. And that really resonated with me. I'm not telling you I've had a couple of terrible shows. I'm not telling you I've had a couple of brilliant shows. But what I'm telling you is that I aspire to be extremely consistent. That if I work for you, even if it's a one-off, you know you're going to get me, and I'm going to give you my best possible effort.
Right.
I aspire to perfection. I don't believe I've reached it yet. I've come close on a couple of fights or a couple of shows. I think it's probably unattainable, but I definitely aspire to it. But things that would really bother me would be just little hitches, a slight stammer, things like that. Very, very minute stuff.
Okay.
But that's the stuff that would not make me feel great about things, that I would probably go back and watch. You know, early on when you're a commentator, you're always told you got to go back and you got to watch some stuff. And I'm a big believer in that. And then there comes a point when, again, it's just like self-flagellation. Like, what are you doing here? There's no reason to go back and watch it. You're either going to be self-congratulatory, or more likely you're just going to say, oh my God. And again, if you can't get that time, there's not a whole lot you can do about it.
What is the most difficult aspect of calling fights in BKFC?
So I don't find it difficult. I love it, but it's so fast. It's almost like a radio play-by-play call at times. You know, boxing, especially if you're doing really high-level boxing for title fights, you know, like a USB or an NABF, or then you get to do title fights for these 10 and 12 round fights. There's a certain rhythm, almost an agreement between the fighters as it settles in. And the pacing is just going to be different, especially with really, really elite fighters on 10 and 12 round fights. And your commentary has to match that. I love grappling. I started grappling before I started striking. I started Sambo a billion years ago because I couldn't find a jiu-jitsu school in Kansas City. And the closest thing I could find was a Sambo school. Now there's a lot of jiu-jitsu schools, but back then who knew what jiu-jitsu was until UFC 1 behind me. So I love MMA and grappling sequences, but just the nature of certain grappling sequences, 5-minute rounds, someone's maybe in half guard or in side control, where they have double unders against the bench, you pace accordingly. So I don't find it difficult, but it's just a little different. It's almost if you were commentating the NFL on television on a Sunday and then radio on a Monday. You're going to be a little faster and a little more vocal, I think. And that's the nature of the sport. And it's really the 5 2-minute rounds more than anything. But it almost gets into a radio play-by-play call for me, which is describing a few more punches, a few more flurries, things like that. I'm so fortunate that I have Chris Lytle as one of my best friends and my greatest broadcast partner ever. And we have this rhythm. We just intuitively now, BKFC has done 101 shows. So I've done 5 with Chris. The first few were with Antonio Tarver. So 94 and 95 with Chris, just kind of intuitively just kind of flow in and out without ever thinking about it. But that's the difference. If someone were to watch me on boxing, watch me on MMA, and then watch me on bare knuckle, they'll just see it's just a little faster, a little more vocal, because I'm trying to match. And that's what I do in every sport, every combat sport I commentate. I only commentate fight sports, combat sports, but trying to match that. Because you're not going crazy if someone is stuck in closed guard and they're looking to pass. Or someone's locking up a triangle, you might turn it up a little bit, but you're not going crazy as if someone is throwing an 8-punch sequence in bare knuckle and their opponent against the corner.
Right. Okay, Sean, what is the the most important asset that BKFC possesses?
I think it's open-mindedness. I really do. I adore David Feldman. It's cool when you work for someone who you consider a really close friend and who you also really admire. He is so open-minded. Taking this sport from the 17 and the 1800s, trying to pay homage to that, like scratch lines that we have when the fighters come up with scratch to start every round. That's directly out of the London prize ring rules of 1853 and Broughton's rules of 1743. but also bringing in modern elements, evolving, looking at things early on. For instance, early on, we talked about, do we do 7 rounds in championship fights? Do we allow spinning back fists? What types of things would work? What types of things wouldn't? He's open-minded. He's creative. He's always looking for things. That's what I think BKFC has going. Let's bring in Mike Perry. Let's bring in Paige Van Zandt. Let's bring in Austin Trout. Let's bring in Luis Palomino. Let's give these different people a chance. Let's throw everything together. It really is not dissimilar from what Art Davie did. And just maybe because of my relationship with both Dave Feldman and Art Davie, I see that more than most. But Art Davie was the same way. Let's get a sumo guy. Why not? Let's get somebody from Jacksalat in Indonesia. Let's get somebody from kickboxing. Let's get somebody from Greco-Roman wrestling. Let's see what happens. Let's throw them all in together. Why not? Let's see what this turns out to be. And there's that spirit of open-mindedness and creativity that still permeates through the UFC and MMA, but really right now is resonating, I think, in BKFC.
Okay. I love Art Davie. I don't love him probably as much as you do, just because I don't know him personally. And actually,
he's the greatest. He is absolutely the greatest. I profess full love for Art. He is a member of my family.
I'm waiting to hear back from him currently, but I want to hear a little bit about the book.
Yeah, so Art. So I got to know Art in 2011. And we really hit it off. And he's just such a magnificent storyteller. He's the world's most charismatic person. And when Art and I really started talking a lot in 2011, my wife was pregnant with our younger daughter, Hadley. And my older daughter, Ellie, was 5 years old at the time. And there were a lot of nights that my wife was going to bed early and being pregnant and a 5-year-old kid. And Art and I would stay up and talk. He was living in Beverly Hills at the time. He now lives outside of Las Vegas. I was living in a different house, but still in Shawnee, Kansas. And just talking and telling stories. And one day I just said, Art, man, this is a book. And my first thought was like maybe an oral history. Like, we'll get Art, we'll get Ken Shamrock, we'll get Campbell McLaren, although I realize that wouldn't have been a very good idea. Bob Meyerowitz, John McCarthy, his wife Elaine McCarthy, who was the travel director. Talk to Jim Brown, who was a commentator. Pat Smith, I'm naming some people who have unfortunately passed away now, but all of these key people. Then the more I talked to Art, and the more I thought about it, I'm like, man, all roads lead to Art. Everybody who I just mentioned was brought in by Art Davie. And there was such a misconception, even misconceptions I had about who really started this and the roles of these different people. And I said to Art, I was like, we're going to try a book. And we really didn't have a firm idea. We're just like, let's try a book. And I spent a lot of hours with Art, just putting him on speaker and just recording into my little digital. Actually, I think I still have it. Here we go. My little digital recording thing is about, 15, 16 years old, but it still works. It's called a Zoom. I don't think they make it, but just literally putting it up to the cell phone on speaker, asking Art, why Denver, Colorado? Why an 8-man tournament? Just every possible question that the kid who watched UFC 1 and every UFC subsequently since wanted to know. And why did you do this? Why that? Why this? Why that? And almost to the point of driving him crazy. And Art is a really good writer, and then Art would write things, and then I would write things, and we just kind of meshed together. We wound up finding a publisher, got the book published in 2015. But it's optioned for a movie. It's been optioned for a movie for a long time, but that's awesome. A long, slow process, Mike. I'll tell you. But outside of my family, I am more proud of the book than anything I've done. As I like my career outside of my family. I'm so proud of what I've been able to do in my, not to be self-congratulatory, but I am really, really
No,
proud
that's
of the work
okay.
I've been able to do in broadcasting. But the book is just something special to me. It's funny because everybody who I asked to go give a fake Amazon review, none of them did. But then all these 5-star reviews started coming on Amazon. And I'm like, wow, that's great. One, the people I asked to do it couldn't be bothered to do it, but two, like, people really like this book. And you don't know. It's weird, right? Like, I remember Sidney Pollack, the late film director, describing making a movie is like taking a record, because when he made the analogy, there were still records. He said, like putting your finger on it and dragging it along, and then thinking it's going to turn out great because you don't really know in the process. And that's writing a book. Like, God, we wrote that book for over a year, and Art and I gave everything to it. And you hope people like it. You don't know. Nobody sets out to write a bad book. And then sometimes you read books, and it's like, God, I'm reading a book right now. I know the author and gave it to me. Oh, wow. And I know that it's so important to him. So you don't know, man. You don't know. You can be a great writer and do a terrible book, or a mediocre writer and do a great book. It's weird how that works. But I think the planets aligned. I'm so proud of the book. 10 years later, it's impossible for me to think that that book is 10 years old. It came out July 1st, 2018. And it's the true story. And so both Art and I have the benefit of having Big John McCarthy, one of our really close friends. And while John didn't referee BKFC 1, he was a blue belt at the Gracie Academy. Art knew him. Art hired his wife, Elaine. Still, his wife, I talked to Elaine last week, just amazing people, is his travel director for UFC 1. And I think I've got a pretty good memory. John's got an even better memory than me. And John was able to verify things, because as much as you want to remember stuff, I was asking Art to remember things that had happened 20 plus years ago in sequence. Just think about that. Think about your life 20 years ago. Now remember them in sequence. Did you meet this friend or this friend first? Did you meet this girl or that girl first? Who did you go out with? What did this? So remembering things is easy. Remembering things in sequence is really, really tough. And John McCarthy was there as sometimes as a prompt, like, no, I think this happened. Or, oh, yeah, that's right. This happened, because we're writing this book in 2014, and he's trying to remember things from 1992 in sequence. And also because, again, I love fighting. I watched all the early UFCs. I still watch every single UFC. But so when I'm writing about UFC 1, I had the benefit of having been nerdy enough to have recorded that. I still have the VHS. And not that I hadn't watched it a lot before, but I must have watched that 50, 60 times while writing the book to get everything right on that. So I wanted it to serve as Art's memoir, his first-person account of creating UFC. But beyond that, and Art knows this, and we talk about this all the time, still on the book, it serves as the historical record. It's not some self-congratulatory fluff piece. It really talks about how the UFC was made. Art admits the mistakes he made. He talks about what he did right, what he did wrong. He's very, very human throughout this book. It's not a victory lap by any means. It's the absolute real story of how the UFC was created. And again, I'm intensely proud of it. If anybody wants a copy, by the way, so we pulled it out of bookstores and Amazon. I'll explain that. But it's Is This Legal? Thebook.com. Is This Legal? Thebook.com. Basically, when we were in negotiations to sell the film rights, which we ultimately did, Art and I went to our publisher and said we would like to get the film rights. And he said, I don't care anything about film rights, but I have about 2,000 books from the 20,000 original run that haven't sold. So if you'll take those off of my hands for a set price, I'll give you the film rights. We're like, well, we don't really want the book, but we want the film rights. So we came to an agreement. So they're under 1,500, maybe 1,100 first edition, and they live in my house. And so we just sell them privately, but we pulled them out of bookstores. We pulled them off of Amazon to control that inventory. So if anybody does want a copy, a couple times a year we give a push. We'll do another push around UFC anniversary, 31st anniversary. But again, is this legal? Thebook.com. Most people who buy from us are hardcore fans. They want an autographed copy from Art, occasionally from me, but I say get Art's autograph. But that's how you get the book. But if you'll see it on Amazon, you're probably buying a used book because we own remaining inventory. Our hope is if and knock on wood, when a film comes, there'll be a second edition. I was able to get a literary agent off of this. We'll do a second edition, be updated, do a paperback, and have the movie.
Okay. This next section of the interview, I'm going to ask you some questions I promise you've never been asked before in an interview. And it's because I want to know a little bit more about you, the person, not just the commentator. And I would like to take this opportunity to bring you this portion of the interview from Bucked Up Energy Drink, the official energy drink of Bare Knuckle Fighting Championship. Hang on, this is the Blood Raz. It is my favorite. All right, here we go. Pulled pork or brisket?
So this is a terrible answer. Being from Kansas, I ate a lot of beef and pork as a kid. I don't really eat that anymore. I'm not a vegetarian, and I pass judgment on nobody. It didn't always. I think it's hereditary. My mom has the same stomach, so I mainly eat poultry and seafood. So. Okay. Right now, neither, and I know that sounds like a pick as someone who lives in Kansas City with barbecue. So,
no worries.
Maybe do it as a barbecue turkey breast. How about that?
There we go. That sounds good. All right, Tyson or Ali, both in their prime. Who wins?
Yeah, I think Ali is just slicker because Ali was 220 and Tyson was never above 220. So you have a 6'3", 220 guy against a 5'10", 220 guy in their primes, and for me, that's Ali before he was pulled out for his refusal to go into Vietnam for 3.5 years. And Tyson, I think that's definitely going to prison in Indiana. I think Ali, I just think he's a little too slick, and I just think that he was a better mover, and I think he could have frustrated Tyson.
I think so too. Coffee or energy drinks?
Diet Mountain Dew. Come on.
There we go. Energy drink.
Yeah.
All right. Jordan or LeBron?
Yeah, I'm not a huge basketball fan, but from my very limited knowledge of the NBA, I think it has to be Michael Jordan, right?
Absolutely. Okay. You're going on vacation, cruise ship or ski resort?
Can I say neither? Here's the thing. I don't think I would do well on a cruise ship. Cyrus Fees, who's our host on BKFC, actually just did a cruise with his family in Spain. This is a quick fire round, but I'm telling a story. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
Like you're saying to me, Shawnee, you should go on a cruise ship. They're great. I'm intrigued by them. I don't know. I'm almost 6'3". I wish I were more coordinated. I'm a bit of an oaf. I'm not a klutz. I'm an oaf. I think there's a difference. Klutz, you kind of like lose your balance. Oaf, you kind of fall into stuff and break stuff. So I would probably break my head. But of the two, I would go to a ski resort. I'd probably just ski. I would watch my wife ski.
What is more fun to commentate, an epic knockout or a brutal war?
I like knockouts, man. I'm all about the finish. I like the knockouts.
All right. Both in their prime, GSP or Anderson Silva?
GSP. I think he was. Okay. I think he was better. I think he was a better rounded fighter, and Anderson Silva was more explosive. I think GSP was more technical, and I think he played it safer. I think in their prime, I think GSP wins a decision. I don't think he finishes, but if one were to finish the other, I think Anderson would finish GSP. So I think George St. Pierre, I think wins that by unanimous decision.
All right. Jayhawks or Wildcats?
Yeah, so this is funny, right? Because my mom's dad, somehow the gene pool got watered down. I blame my dad, actually. My mom's dad was an amazing athlete. He played both football and basketball at Kansas State University. And my mom lived early on in Manhattan, Kansas. My grandfather then was in the military at Fort Riley, which is right by Manhattan, Kansas. My mom went to go to Kansas State. They then lived in a little town called Cameron, Missouri. She went to the University of Missouri, but she always loved Kansas State. I grew up in Kansas City. Most people in Kansas City are KU fans. So 20 years ago, I would have said KU, and now I'm telling you the Kansas State Wildcats.
All right. Who is your favorite fighter to commentate?
All time, Fedor Emelianenko.
Awesome. Yeah, who doesn't love Fedor?
Yeah, I was really fortunate. I got to do both of his fights in Affliction, and I did his Brett Rogers fight, which was a Strikeforce M1 co-promote, and then it's on the internet. It's weird. It's like 2008 or 2009, my first stint in M1. He does this thing with Shinya Aoki, and we weren't even sure if it would work or a shoot, and it's kind of a hardcore grappling match. For Ariake, which since has been knocked down, which is a big pro wrestling building in Tokyo. You can find it. It's deep somewhere in the recesses of Daily Motion or YouTube. But I remember even Jimmy Smith and I were commenting. We're like, are they shooting or working in this? And nobody would tell us. So 4 times or maybe 3.5, I was honored to commentate Fedor Emelianenko.
There we go. Okay, your favorite fighter ever?
Muhammad Ali.
Yes. Okay, you can have anybody in the world sing happy birthday to you on your birthday. Who's serenading you?
So, because I think I won't claim to be great at anything except being a father, because I think I'm a great father. It would be Taylor Swift, so my girls could meet
her. There you go. Okay, what sets BKFC fans apart from other fans?
They're so hardcore, so extreme. Like the early UFC fans that Art encountered when Art owned the company. The fact that we had fans in Spain are fans who traveled to Spain. I think it's impossible to do that in the UFC now just because of the sheer volume of tonnage. But the diligence and the hardcore nature of our fans, that's what sets them apart.
Okay. Because I try to reach people who might be struggling with these interviews and inspire people, if you had a message to share with people who might be struggling, going through the crap that we all go through in life, what would you say to them?
No, you know what? I'll tell you. If you look at what you want to do in life, I'm glad you asked that. So that's a fantastic question, Mike. This has been a great interview. We're going to do this again. I'm going to get you Art Davey too. I'm going to call Art. We speak almost every day.
He told me no 3 days ago.
No. I was in Spain. I'll get it. I'll get you set. But no, to your question, whatever someone wants to do in life, I mean. There are parameters. I'm probably not going to play in the NBA, but within these parameters, if you pick something, there's a good chance that you can do it. Again, I'm a guy who comes from this little suburb outside of Kansas City, raised the only child of a single mom who was a public school art teacher, not connected in show business or sports or fighting or anything, television, broadcasting, anything. And again, my mom instilled in me the attitude, and still has this, you can do it. And I really thought, and I talked about this at the beginning of the interview, someone's going to be doing this, so why not be me? So again, one has to be realistic in life, but within parameters of things that we feel we can attain in life, you can absolutely attain that. It takes diligence, it takes hard work, it takes perseverance, it definitely takes a level of mental toughness. But these things are attainable in life. If people feel passionate about something, they should pursue it with everything they have. And people are always going to tell them no. My older daughter, Ellie, who's 19, she started doing Muay Thai at 8. And early on, she would say, "Dad, this is tough." And I would say to her, "Ellie, if this were easy, there'd be like 90 kids in this class. But there are 4. So things that are tough, we have to work for, or else everybody would be doing it." That would be my message. You absolutely can do it because someone's going to be doing that job. So it might as well be you.
Absolutely. I love that. When the day comes that you hang up your microphone and headset, what do you hope your legacy will be, and what do you hope people say about the big wheel?
No, it's really nice. So I never want to quit. I'm like that person. I really hope that number one, that people see me as someone who really loves their family. And second would be just that I treated everybody with respect. There are some things you can and can't control as a commentator. Not everyone's going to like you, no matter how hard you try. I can't control that. I can control how I treat people, and I'm going to treat everybody with kindness and politeness and respect. It's the way I was raised. It's the way I raised my girls, and that's what I would want it to be. Just the type of human being that I am, and how I've interacted with everyone.
I think your legacy will be all right, man.
Thanks, my friend.
When you're not preparing for bare knuckle fighting events, and let's see, doing what was it I saw? You were doing referee and judging courses the other day. When you're not doing fighting stuff, what are your hobbies? What do you do in your free time when you do have some?
I still love the grapple. I love no-gi. Absolutely love it. I wish I was better. I wish I had started when I was like 10, but I didn't because it wasn't really a thing then.
Right.
We had like a Cobra Kai type thing. When I was a kid, we had this Cobra Kai type thing. It was called Bushido Con. And it was all the thug kids of Johnson County, Kansas, which thug is a sliding scale, but whatever. But I was too pathetic and too scared to go in. But that was just like a karate kenpo dojo. I wouldn't have learned how to grapple anyway. But I wish I'd started younger. It really wasn't realistic based on when I was born and where I was born. But no, I love to grapple. I talk about spending time with my family, but I really love spending time with my family. I'm someone who genuinely loves fights. I was catching up watching the UFC for this past weekend, watching those fights this morning. When I was a kid, I watched like every sport. Now I only watch a few sports, but primarily I am watching fighting. I love it. It just nothing ever gets boring to me. You'll hear other commentators, and sometimes they'll break character in interviews. It's like, I really wish I was doing the NFL, or I'd love to have this Major League Baseball job. It's like, hey, cool, whatever. I only want to commentate fights. That's what I love to do. I love watching the NFL. I'm a big Chiefs fan, being in Kansas City. I'm not just a front runner. I've been a Chiefs fan my whole life, being in Kansas City. It's easy to be a Chiefs fan now. It wasn't so much in the 80s. But I love watching the NFL. I'm a massive Manchester United fan. My older daughter, Ellie, watches Manchester United with me. My younger daughter, Hadley, not so much of a sports fan. But watching certain sports, really watching fights, and just being around, being home, because I'm gone about a third of the year. When I'm home, I work out of my house. What we're talking, where we're talking from, is my home office. Just really being present with my family. Saw my mom today, with my wife, with my girls. I have a small family, but a very, very tight family. And throw in our Navy on talking dart on the phone.
That's awesome. What is the best way for fans and friends of yours to keep up with you and what you have going on these days?
Yeah, I appreciate that. So the book, again, is This Legal? Thebook.com. The name of the book is This Legal? Is This Legal? Thebook.com. All the usual social media outlets. I'm not on TikTok. My kids are, I don't know if they want me on or not. Probably not. But on Instagram, on Facebook, I definitely respond to everybody. Sometimes it takes me a while. I don't always see Facebook, but social media is the way. For some reason, I don't do much on Twitter or X now anymore. My kids got me on Threads. I never really figured that out. So probably Instagram or Facebook would be the best way. If people reach out to me, I will always respond, always interact. It might take me a little while, but I will most definitely get to you. And I really love having conversations. It's very rewarding for me too when people come up to me and they'll talk to me at shows. The cool thing about being everything's cool about being a fight commentator. But one of the multitude of cool things about being a fight commentator, we're right there. So, if you're an NFL commentator, you're in a press box. Same with baseball, right? You're kind of in this place where no one can get to you. We might be in front of a railing, but you can probably get our attention before or after the fight. And usually 5 minutes, here's a tip. 5 minutes after the fight, the security leaves and you can get wherever you want to shows. So I love when people come up and talk. During the show, I'm usually preoccupied commentating fights. Before or after, man, I love meeting people and I love talking to people. We just did that in Spain, Chris, right? Lytle and I. So that's great. I always like to be accessible. I always like to talk. I remember when I was trying to get into this industry, and especially when I was a kid, like a kid, like a grade school kid. And when I would see commentators who I admired, and the ones who were very cool to me, and the ones that just kept on walking. So I know who I want to be.
Well, Sean, I am out of questions, sir. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for sharing your time with the channel. That was amazing. I learned a whole lot. Thank you so much. I'll get this uploaded and I'll send you a copy, man.
I'm going to get you Art Davey too. I'm actually going to text Art right now and we'll talk to
Oh my gosh. Don't tell me, just have him message me if it actually happens. I don't want to be sitting and waiting. It'll drive me crazy.
Yeah, I'll text him now. So, all right, hey, thank you so much, and I'll get this on all my social channels. Awesome interview, dude. A+ on your end. That was fantastic.
Thank you very much. I try hard. I'm new, and I'll get better.
No, you did great. See you, my friend.
All right. All right.
All the
Thank
best.
you, Sean. Bye-bye.
Bye.